Well, listen, Denise Findlay, welcome to the show. Somewhat delayed. Um,
Yeah.
I'm just going to dive straight in at the deep end here, Denise. If we yesterday you wrote, if we expect the SNP to get us independence, then give up now. The sooner people accept the SNP as the obstacle to Indy, the sooner we can make progress. That's 7 years on. How on earth has the vehicle to independence become a broken down charabang blocking the road?
Well, I think you have to wonder whether it's deliberate or accidental. I mean, the outcome's the same, but it's hard to see that anybody could have accidentally made such a complete catalogue of errors as Nicola Sturgeon has made. I would really put it back to 2017 and the general election of 2017, where her campaign was weak, to put it mildly, the strong voices. Now, just before that campaign, Nicola Sturgeon had said we were going to have an independence referendum in 2018 autumn or 2019 spring. And they launched the 600, the crowdfunder campaign that's
Yeah.
a subject of controversy today. And then Theresa May replied, now is not the time. So when Theresa May announced the general election, the most natural campaign would have been Scotland's right to choose,
Yeah.
that we have the right to have an independence referendum. But she didn't fight on that. Interestingly, Derek Mackay was actually campaign manager in that campaign. She fought on this ridiculous strong voices, which is completely meaningless and non-motivation for people to vote. So therefore, the people did not turn out. And as a result, many people lost their seats. But
Mm.
it was still a win. It was still 35 MSPs,
Yes.
MPs, which was still a majority. But instead of
Yeah.
presenting it as a win, she presented it as a loss. And I think a lot of people still think Ruth Davidson actually won that election, especially in England. But no politician ever does that. Have you ever known a politician to present a win as a loss? Politicians present losses as wins. They say, yeah, we
Exactly.
lost, but we increased our vote by 0.5%, so it was really a victory.
Yeah.
Or we lost, but the circumstances meant it was really a victory. I've never known a politician ever to present a win as a loss. But
Yeah.
Nicola Sturgeon presented a win as a loss. And then that was the first of the can kicking. And she announced that she would pause. She would update the Scottish Parliament on her plans for an independence referendum. Interesting as well at that point was Nicola Sturgeon took full control of the timing and the strategy for independence. And it's interesting that she doesn't just make all the decisions about when we're going to have an independence referendum, if we're going to have one, and under what circumstances. But she says things like, I will update you next month. Well, why not update us now? It's a
Yes.
control thing. She
Yes.
takes control. And so now this independence movement that in 2015 was very vibrant is now just passively waiting for Nicola Sturgeon to make a decision.
Yes.
And and it should not be in her hands. But Nicola Sturgeon has taken all the power into her hands. So she also will, use the language of the unionists, which she uses like all the time. So, for example, it was Nicola Sturgeon who said this Section 30 was a gold standard, which
Yeah.
it's not. Like
No.
no country
No.
in the world has been made independent through a Section 30 of the Scotland Act for obvious reasons. It's
Okay.
her that brought in illegal referendums, the idea of an illegal referendum.
And wildcats.
It's her, yeah, it's her that when Alba came along, talked of gaming the system. It's her that today is using May's words and has actually been using for about 4 years. Now is not the time. We'll have a referendum when we know the terms of Brexit. We'll have a referendum after COVID. We'll have a referendum after COVID recovery. She's using now is not the time. And she's
Okay.
also using broad shoulders, which is from the Better Together campaign, that we need the
Yes.
broad shoulders of the UK to recover from COVID, which is really not much wonder support for independence is dropping. when you have the leader of the supposed leader of the independence movement telling you that you can't manage on your own.
So you would
So
pinpoint.
I,
So you would pinpoint the 2017 election as a turning
yes,
point. That was the election where it was almost, you weren't supposed to mention independence. It
yes,
was only
yes.
the Tories and the Unionists who were mentioning independence. Roddy Barhead Boy has commented many times about that, and he believes the 500,000 votes that were lost to the SNP were lost from apathy,
Yes.
and not from any
And
unionist politicizing of the issue. Can I just move on to?
yeah, that's actually been borne out by opinion polls after the event.
Yeah.
They actually did polling, and it's borne out. There was people staying at home as opposed to, the support for the union.
Yeah, pro-independence voters just not voting because they felt there was nothing to vote for. You mentioned ALPA as the only hope, the ALPA party. Currently, their only representatives are former SNP officials, elected officials. How can they inject this sense of urgency that's needed? Technically, they don't have a mandate, but the plans are good. Join EFTA, get European trade moving again, negotiate with Westminster instead of asking them. The blueprint is there, but how will they get this message out without the elected officials?
I do feel, and I think this is something we might come on to later, about how depressed people in the independence movement are. Yeah. And it is a very, very depressing time. I think even the SNP both votes crowd are depressed because afterwards they realise that a referendum isn't happening this term, let's be honest. And it's hard to see a path out of the situation we're in. We've had Boris Johnson today suggesting he would like, Dominic Cummings saying that Boris Johnson would like to close the Scottish Parliament. Yeah. So we have got no doubt of their plans for the Scottish Parliament. And we've handed 5 years of power to Nicola Sturgeon, who will not stand against anything the Tories will do to us. For example, when Brexit happened and we were promised we would not be dragged out of the EU against our will. Well, we have been, but it's not just that. We have the worst possible deal. At a certain point, Nicola Sturgeon had the votes in the House of Parliament that could have passed May's deal on the third attempt, and she got nothing for Scotland, nothing. We could have had a softer Brexit, a good deal for Scotland, and probably May would still have been Prime Minister if she had played a better hand. Yes, but she did not. She got nothing, absolutely nothing. Scotland has the hardest Brexit. So despite being in a situation where her Westminster votes actually mattered, she didn't capitalise on it at all. So either she is just like the worst strategist ever, or she has a different agenda and she's taking different, a different agenda completely.
Yeah. Sometimes it seems it's almost as if it's on purpose, which...
yes, and
which is a terribly conspiratorial thought, so we have to put that away.
Yeah, and then the other point about this tactics, to bring it up to date, really, is the people's vote. So in 2018, I think it was, she decided that instead, so there was two things we could have been campaigning on. Obviously independence, but as a backup to independence, there were two things going on. First, there was the internal market bill, the power grab, that started in 2018, that people never knew about. I mean, nobody ever mentioned it. Nicola Sturgeon never talked about the power grab. So there's the power grab. And then there was also, a paper had been produced called Scotland's Place in Europe, that was the differentiated deal for Scotland, that again was produced, never heard of again. So there was two things we could have campaigned on, and in the situation of the minority parliament could have had some effect. However, she chose to go on the people's vote. But again, she made that decision. The SNP conference didn't make that decision. She announced it prior to SNP conference in October. So it was entirely Nicola Sturgeon's decision to, instead of campaigning on things that mattered and benefited Scotland, she decided to campaign to reverse the result of the Brexit referendum that England had voted for.
That England had voted
Which,
for, exactly, yeah.
yes,
2018 was perhaps the beginning of this more presidential Sturgeon style, because I noticed today, I was looking at a video clip before we linked up here, where she said, my job as First Minister is to decide when the referendum should take place. She didn't say the cabinet, she didn't say the Scottish people.
It's a conference.
It became very much my decision, me, I. These words figure more and more since 2018 in Nicola Sturgeon's way of speaking, which is actually worrying for a democratically elected government when the leader is taking all decisions, even, we'll get into later into COVID, but
And so to answer your question about Alba, I know I've right around the houses on it, and
doors.
how quite hopeless the independence movement feels. I think that the point is we need to keep going. The Alba branches are being set up, and Alba's trying their best. What seemed to happen in the election is that we did find out that social media is indeed a bubble. But the social media side of it for Alba actually went quite well. And if you look at the poll in the National, that the day before the election had Alba getting 50% of the list vote, and Alba Rising trending in the UK the day before. So had the voters only been social media, we would have been in a very strong position to be getting independence today. But unfortunately, Alba didn't make it out of the social media bubble. Again, Nicola Sturgeon, who kind of likes to stymie any plan that might possibly bring us independence. She stymied Angus MacNeil and Chris Mackenzie's Plan B, she stymied Martin Keaton's Section 30 bid, and she stymied Alba's supermajority idea. Her going hard on both votes, and even actually, I would say, lying by saying your second vote elects the First Minister. So
that was only true back in 2011. In the 2011 context, it was true. 2021, it was a nonsense.
And continuing to criticise, smear Alex Salmond any opportunity she got. And then that, together with the broadcasters and the unionist press and the unionist broadcasters who made common cause with the SNP. So the SNP now are acting a bit like Labour did for the Tories and Better Together. The unionists didn't touch Alba, and Alba actually threatened unionist seats. It was the unionist seats that Alba was threatening, not the SNP seats. The unionists sat back. They didn't do anything. They left it to Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon was the front woman for the unionists in the 2021 election, and she saved the unionist seats, saved their bacon. The broadcaster blackout meant that people didn't really know. It was too late, and it takes a long time, to get ideas. They might have known that Alex Salmond had a party, but I don't think they would know its name. And so that really became the problem at the ballot box. It was just like people didn't really know, and there was no logo or anything on the ballot paper. I also think a little bit the pronunciation. So we were going around Dundee saying, with Alex Salmond's voice, saying Alapa, but we would never call it Alapa. We would call it Alba, So I think there was a number of issues that entirely online, no COVID, because of COVID, meant you were slave to technology. Plus, you couldn't have visible big rallies, which could have been done to raise visibility. So there was a lot of problems, but I just feel that we need to keep going. And what we need to do is await events and await an opportunity to grasp.
Well, the elections are a bit far off at the moment. Denise, another social media response yesterday was from someone called MacHaggis69. They wrote, "The new SNP has taken the wind out of the sails of nearly all the most prominent supporters and indie activists." That's on the subject of what you mentioned about sort of a depressed, downbeat mood. It's undeniable, I think, that campaign fatigue and abuse has led to the retirements. We have Stuart Campbell, Colin Dunn, known as Indie Poster Boy, Roddy McLeod, the AUB organizer,
Yes.
has actually removed himself from Twitter today. I don't know if you noticed that. How significant is the loss of these prominent voices to the Yes movement?
Well, yeah, I'm hoping that they're taking a break rather than gone for good. Because I feel that, again, as I said about awaiting events, the fact is that there's a bit of burnout and it's hitting your head against a brick wall. And this is what I feel like Roddy had. Now, Roddy had, and similarly with Stuart Campbell. Stuart Campbell is my absolute top hero. He is the most principled, straight talking person, just give you the truth. And I'd rather somebody gave me the truth than lied to me. And he never lies, ever. And then you have Roddy, who has campaigned for independence since the 60s, who was in situations when he went to counts when SNP lose their deposit and the Labour councillors are jeering and laughing at him, and he has supported them his entire life, 100%, and given, his time doing his blogs. Similar attitude to Grouspeter is another one, who just spent his entire life campaigning for independence when it was a distant dream and nobody shared, very few people shared it. Now they got into a situation where they have a Yes movement. All these newcomers come in after 2014 in the Yes movement, not knowing the history, maybe not having been interested in politics before, so don't actually see the signs, don't really understand the signs of a leadership with no intention of delivering independence. But Roddy sees that very, very clearly. Yeah. He's been in this game a long, long time. He knows exactly what Nicola Sturgeon is. And therefore, to be then derided by people and told he's a he's supporting unionists, he's fifth column, and get called names by fellow independent supporters. I think it's just, eventually it wears people down. Stuart Campbell was similar. He wrote a blog once, not that long ago, saying what it's like being me. And it was about somebody calling them the most atrocious names and things on Facebook. And it's when they come in for sustained abuse day after day from people that should be on their own side. And when you have an MP such as Peter Wishart. Now, Pete Wishart is an MP. He has a platform. He's in a position of power and he is paid by us. He is put in his position by the votes for the SNP. He then derides these bloggers, calls them names, and makes fun of them. Now, I had him do it to me. Like, I am blocked by Pete Wishart, so I blocked him back, but he clearly is able to go and see my account if he wants. He must have second accounts. And I had put this, it's a phoenix. It's like the rise, the hope, symbol of hope, rising again. And he made the most utter fun of this, but behind a block. So that's the kind of cowardly person he is. Blocks the bloggers, and he calls them the most terrible names. So when you have MPs in positions of power, advocating against you, telling their thousands and tens of thousands of followers, that you're a horrible person, you're tinfoil hat, you're right wing, you're, what's it called, India non, or,
vile, the word vile is their favorite.
Vile bloggers and laughing at you. And then, you're kind of, and encouraging pile-ons. I mean, I had this situation with Maddie Black encouraging a pile-on to me. It happens to us all. So when you have people on your own side doing this, I think it just wears you down and you end up thinking, this is just not worth it. It's not worth it. These people, there's this phrase, I strove with none, for none was worth my strife. I think it's Shakespeare or something. But I feel that that's where they are. They're like, this is not worth it at the moment. So I'm hoping they have a good, well-earned break, recharge their batteries, and then come back fighting when there's something worth fighting for. But at the moment, they don't feel like it's worth fighting for these people like Pete Wishart and others who are
It'd be very, very
cheating so
difficult to campaign
badly.
for him. It would be very
Yes.
difficult. At the next election in 2024, there are some SNP MPs who I would believe it would be almost impossible to campaign for them. And so the dilemma will arise there. You know, what do we do? Um, Denise, is the Scottish Free Media Project an attempt to fill the gap here with this perhaps despondency, let's call it that, or is it about solidarity of strength in numbers in the current anti-free speech climate?
It is actually solidarity and strength in numbers. I think there was a fear. Well, firstly, we were called bloggers, and people didn't like the name bloggers too much because it just sounded a little bit, we wanted a better phrase to describe the group. So it came up with Scottish Free Media. But it's the climate of fear. And it's not just the women that have the fear of criminal prosecution. We know that they target, we should say, pro-Indy but anti-Nicola Sturgeon SNP people. It's interesting that the people that are targeted by the SNP government and the prosecution service and the police. And they tend to be independent supporters, which is unusual with an independent supporting government. You would think, like, if the government was corrupt and deciding to politically prosecute their enemies, they would actually politically prosecute unionists. But they seem to see that their enemies are actually pro-independence people that don't agree with their strategies.
Okay. It will be interesting to see if there's a change in tack from the new Lord Advocate, and also if the new Lord Advocate distances herself from the Scottish Cabinet, Scottish Government. I don't know if she's allowed to do that on her own, under her own steam. Denise, going to a subject you perhaps don't want to talk about, but just briefly, you were involved in the recent women's protest outside Holyrood. Now that grabbed the attention of the mainstream media and was very successful. Briefly, what lay behind it? What was the primary motivation?
Well, I think that is like women being silenced. There's two things happening, obviously. Is the removal of women's right to single-sex spaces and services under the Equalities Act, and the SNP Green government, which is another thing that I'm sure SNP conference have not had to vote on, is whether to go into a coalition with the Greens. And, if you remember when the Lib Dems went into coalitions with the Tories, they had to have a vote on it, but there's no democracy in the SNP. So the SNP Green government is likely to bring in a self-ID. Self-ID means that anyone can say they're the opposite sex on their own say-so. So any man can say he's a woman, and that he has to be accepted as a woman. So women's rights are necessarily exclusive. It means they exclude males, biological males. And this would mean that males would be able to access women's spaces. And if we've seen recently, there's an incident in California in a spa with a male body. I think a lot of people think that transgender, they don't have their male parts, but they do. No. So yes, so that's one thing going on, the removal of those rights under the Equalities Act. And the second thing is the hate crimes bill. So the hate crimes bill is going into law, and we have no certainty of what we can and can't say. So women live in fear of political prosecution, which is a massive attack on our right to free expression, which is a human right. And I'm really pleased to see that Joanna Cherry has decided to return to the law to defend women that's been accused. If you look at the SNP definition of transphobia, which the NEC recently passed, note the NEC, not the conference, the definition means that you would not be able to say that men self-ID as women in order to access vulnerable women in prison. So you wouldn't be able to say a male sex offender might ID as a woman in order to access women's prisons. That would you wouldn't be able to say that under the SNP definition of transphobia, nor would you be able to say that trans women are biologically male. That is transphobic under the SNP definition of transphobia. So it is a very, very scary time for women, and not knowing what you can and can't say, and whether the police are actually adopting the SNP definition of transphobia, which they may be doing. For example, some women wrote in chalk. During COVID, it's not been possible to have political protests. And instead, women have been doing things like writing on slates, tying ribbons with stickers and chalk. So in 2 occasions, women have been visited by the police for writing in chalk. They've written, "Women's rights are not a hate crime," in chalk, and had a visit for the police. One woman was threatened that if she did it again, it'd be breach of the peace. So that is the environment women are living in. And our issue is like our fear. I would never have thought that I'd be in a situation where you could be jailed for your political opinions. But women in Scotland are in a situation where we can be jailed for our political opinions. And that's what Nicola Sturgeon's SNP government have done.
I mean, when you talk about chalk, we're talking about chalk that washes away in the rain. And there's lots of rain in Scotland.
Yes, chalk. If you write in chalk, you're visited by the police.
It's mind-boggling. Denise, recent revelations show the extent of the Scottish Government's funding of Stonewall. Yes. But it appears that financial support is only part of the story. There's also a sort of a points-based system. Has this been influencing MPs, MSPs, social media activity, public pronouncements?
Yes, apparently, like, they get points for social media activity promoting, which is mainly trans rights. So if you say it's trans ideology and trans rights, they get points for promoting it. I think the other thing, though, as well as the points and social media activity, how much you've been promoting trans ideology, there's also the issue of the influencing government policy. So a lot of the groups that the government funds are also part of Stonewall schemes. So when they're writing government policy, these groups have an input. And a lot of the, shall we say, the ministers are less than, expert in their field, shall we say, and they outsource policy, the writing of the bills, to these other government bodies that are influenced by Stonewall. So, for example, in the last year, our one victory, which was over the right of the survivors of rape and sexual assault to ask for a female examiner, that was against what the advice of these government funded bodies had given. So it's not just the social media activity, it's actually the influence of policy. So we have For Women Scotland are taking the Scottish Government to court on appeal against the gender representation on public boards, which was meant to increase women on public boards. But then you have the SNP MP Kirsty Blackman say, if the board was 50% male and 50% trans women, then that would be fine. So they've included in their definition of woman somebody, like a name on a utility bill. And somebody that cross-dresses once a week on a Saturday night can be counted as a woman.
So you could, in theory, have 100% male representation, biologically male representation on a committee that is supposed to be gender balanced or sex balanced or whatever. Incredible. Denise, another subject. The First Minister has made a great show of taking personal responsibility for the COVID response. Compared to our Nordic neighbours, our immediate neighbours, where I'm sitting, I'm just a few hundred kilometres across the North Sea. Things are really quite different. I was just looking at the figures from the 5th of July. Scotland has had almost 8,000 COVID deaths, 10,000 if you look at death certificates. Well, let's just say take the lower figure, which is terribly tragic. testing positivity rate in Scotland is 12.6 here. The testing positivity rate in Denmark is 0.5%. And the total deaths from COVID since the whole thing began is just over 2,500. 4 times the amount, positivity rates. There are other things which really, really don't look good. And yet Nicola Sturgeon is riding this wave of I'm in charge, my decisions. Is this going to come back and haunt her in some way, or do people still think she's doing a good job?
Well, I believe that she's very much protected by the mainstream media. That's the only way she could have got through this whole COVID period and come out a hero, because of her protection by the mainstream media. And people need to look at how the mainstream media treat Nicola Sturgeon, and even things like pictures of her with flowers and babies, and realize that she is protected. And she's protected for a reason, because it's a way of stopping Scottish independence by having her in charge.
Are you you're talking about the Unionist, the pro-London Unionist media?
Yeah. Yes, she could never have ruled out her handling of COVID if she hadn't had the media on side. She could never have ruled out the Fabiani inquiry with all the revelations of her illegal processes, leaks to the press, ignoring legal advice, misleading the committee. She wrote it all out. She wrote out this handling of COVID, and she's still writing it out because she's protected by the media, because the British state have decided that the best way to stop independence is to make sure Nicola Sturgeon leads the independence movement. So they protect her. There's pictures of her, numerous pictures of her holding children, surrounded by flowers, put out just before the election by the Unionist media. The Unionist media protect Nicola Sturgeon, and that's why she's getting away with it. Yeah. She comes in every day to people, on the BBC, the broadcast, to read out some statistics, which has boosted her personal profile. But she is handling it. Is she handling it better than Johnson? At the moment, no. In the beginning, Scotland was definitely lagging in the UK, England. So if you looked at it by population share, but now Scotland's well ahead in COVID cases of the rest of the UK on population share. You don't pay any political price, because she's protected. But I think I don't think it will come back to bite her, because I think the people want to keep her in charge. The powers that be want to keep her in charge. Yeah, so they're going to continue with this story that she's done a fantastic job with COVID, where she has done more communication than Boris Johnson, but doing a better job of Boris Johnson is not doing a good job. And she has used this, and the other Unionist thing is this four nation approach that she's followed lockstep with Boris Johnson. So there's things I know that, for example, I'm sure Denmark closed their border. They had their border closed for a long time. Whereas Nicola Sturgeon, actually, people make excuses for her. If you say, why did you close the border? Oh, she can't, it's reserved. No, it's public health. Nicola Sturgeon could have closed the border for public health. She could have closed the airports for public health, but she's never done that, because she wasn't allowed to. It wasn't in lockstep with the rest of the UK. So she hasn't taken initiatives for fear of upsetting Westminster and Boris Johnson, such as closing the border. She's only done what she's been allowed to do. And that's why we've done badly compared to the rest of Europe, and roughly on par with the rest of the UK, those slipping behind at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the border. That was one of the things that happened here quite quickly. The lockdown was earlier than Scotland. They reacted very quickly. The border to Germany, Scotland, like Denmark, has a large southern neighbour, a hugely populous southern neighbour. And that border was very strictly controlled. Now, I live a few kilometres from the sea border with Sweden. That has been closed, much to the Swedes' irritation. The large bridge from Copenhagen to southern Sweden was also shut off. Only essential traffic moved back and forward. And that went on for a very, very long time. And even Norway Norway has even had tackled this even results-wise even better than Denmark, because it has even had half of the casualties in that sense. But another interesting aspect of this is you talked about communication. That really was Nicola Sturgeon's strength. Now, the Danish PM is very rarely on TV. I don't know if there's any other leader in the Western world who's on TV every day promoting their press
Nicola
conference.
Sturgeon. I think she's promoting Nicola Sturgeon. That's why she's on TV every day. Most leaders would have other things to do than read out stats. And also, it would be better to leave it to health professionals, so not to politicize a pandemic. Yes. That you get better buy-in. And I think a lot of countries' leaders have judged that it's health professionals that front up these broadcasts, not politicians, to take politics out of it. But Nicola Sturgeon, after Alex Salmond, she's very much an opportunist. So Alex Salmond was acquitted of all charges. So one of her plans has gone awry. And she realized that she needed to get on TV every day to increase her personal popularity. And that's what she did. And then run a campaign for the Scottish elections, which was buses with her face on it, saying both votes, nothing about independence, and put her name on the ballot paper. Okay. So I think that it was a deliberate tactic of hers to ensure that she increased she's interested in her own personal popularity, and that was a way of doing it. Yeah. And if you remember about the borders, remember the guys that went down when we should have closed the border.
Yes, Dave Llewellyn was one of them. Dave Llewellyn was one of those.
Yeah, and they got called racist and all sorts by Humza Yusuf. And this is examples of how the SNP treat independent supporters and what they call them and the names they call them. You know, and there's no doubt whatsoever that the SNP and the independence movement are enemies. So as Wings would say, the SNP is the enemy of independence, or you could be less harsh and say they're the obstacle to independence. And I do believe the SNP are the obstacle to independence now that Scotland has. The people want independence. Yeah. The people could be led to a resounding victory for independence with the right leader. But the SNP is the obstacle. Yeah. And so now you're of the opinion that the only way we can get independence is for the SNP fail. And I think that's where I am.
Denise, you have left the SNP. You're no longer a member of the party, I take it.
Yeah, of course.
Now, you mentioned Alex Salmond. He's been vindicated in 2 court cases.
Yes.
During the Holyrood investigation, I watched that very closely, every witness, I believe. Many of these associates of the First Minister and those close to her lied. They lied under oath. Let's not just say it as it is. They lied. They had to come back and correct their testimony. Now, you must still have contacts with people in the SNP. Do you sense any sense of embarrassment or people having second thoughts about the leadership, that, you know, maybe it's time for a change, that she quietly went to another job somewhere else?
Well, for a start, Nicola Sturgeon won't stand down until she's told to, or she decides it's going to benefit her. She's going to stay in power as long as she possibly can. So that I don't think she's going to stand down. What I have from the people in the SNP, so there's 2 things. I think, like, the people who paid attention, I paid a lot of attention to the court case, and the people that paid attention knew he was innocent. It wasn't just the jury. If you followed the court case, you would know without doubt that he was innocent, and so did the jury. So he wasn't. He is a victim of this. Alex Salmond is a victim. He's a victim of an unlawful and biased process, and he's a victim of this court case. That it's amazing that some of these things ever got to court, actually, and that's a surprising thing that it made it to court. In some ways, you think that's quite good, because the fact it made it to court was good, because he got proved innocent. You know, yes. And it wasn't a he said, she said. I mean, there was rebuttal witnesses that rebutted it and said it did not happen. So it wasn't like, the typical thing. But since then, Nicola Sturgeon and the people around her have never let it go, have continued to pretend that the jury was wrong on any occasions they get. But the fact remains, he was found innocent by a jury and he has not been convicted of anything. And no allegation against him has been upheld. Not a single allegation against him, either through the Scottish government process, which was judged unlawful and biased, or through the court case. So he's not got a stain on his character. You would not believe that if you listen to Nicola Sturgeon, but he actually doesn't. So in the SNP, I think what they're waiting for is the next elections in November. There's still, the people that remain are still hoping for change. But last November was the last chance saloon. People got it together. They elected people from a slate of good guys, people that we felt were pro-Indy first. We're going to push independence and not push divisive gender or hate crime policies, but push independence.
Now you're talking about elections to the NEC, the ruling body of the SNP.
There's the NEC and the conference, the committees. So there was elections to these committees last November, and that sort of was the last chance saloon, I think, for a lot of people with the SNP, and the people got elected. But through gerrymandering, the people that were kicked out were gerrymandered back in through the affiliate organisations, and therefore the control of the NEC stayed with the leadership. And because many NEC positions are not directly elected by conference, about a third are not directly elected. So leadership kept control as much as they could. And the rest, their tactic for the committees was just not to have them meet. So the committees just didn't meet. So that meant that wasn't a problem, that was full of people that wanted to push for independence. So this November, the people that are left in the SNP from the activists are, I think, looking for, well, maybe we can get change, but they won't. It won't work. I know it won't work.
Is that what you're hearing on the ground from the contacts you have?
Yeah, so a lot of the activists have left. So the weird thing is, I think the huge majority of the most strident, the most hardworking, the activists that were, doing the most for independence, every day, have left and joined ALBA. The women have left and joined ALBA. Yeah. So the people that are left in the SNP, who are activists, who really want independence, as opposed to careerists and people that sign up and pay their money every month because they want independence, but they have lives. They don't do anything else but just pay their fees because they think paying their fee to the SNP helps independence. So, but the people that are left, I think, are looking to the next elections, which are November, to try and refocus the SNP. They are wanting to try and get the conference. Good luck with that. It's not going to happen. They're looking to get the conference to have resolutions on having an independence referendum, when it's going to be. But I don't think they'll succeed, but I think they're still holding out hope. One of them actually said, quote, he's staying in the SNP until the independence referendum to push for one, which, he's trying.
Yes.
So there are people within trying to push for the independence referendum, but I just don't think he'll succeed. I also don't think we should have an independence referendum to get independence. I think we should do it through the parliament route.
Exactly, yeah. And the confirmatory referendum after the event would be the sensible one. I don't even know if we need one. I don't even know if we need one. My feeling is that if Nicola Sturgeon, if we had a leader that wanted independence, they could declare independence tomorrow. Yes. They can take their MSPs and their MPs, call an assembly, vote for independence, invite other countries to recognise us, job done. Yeah. We could do it tomorrow. The will isn't there. Definitely. Could approach the UN and quickly approach EFTA to get European trade going again. The opportunities are there, which is those of us in other countries who have seen this happen around us to other smaller nations in the past 20, 30 years, since the fall of the East Bloc, the Soviet Union, are just
Because it
amazed.
is, Nicola Sturgeon is making it a lot harder than it actually is. She's putting barriers in the way to independence. The process for gaining independence, there's no real international law in it. The process is a three-step process. It's you get some democratic event, declare independence, and invite other countries to recognize you. That's it. That's how you get independence. A democratic event can be an assembly. It doesn't even have to be an election. You could have an assembly of your MPs and MSPs and declare independence.
Which brings us back to the uncomfortable truth that the leader of the SNP appears to be actively blocking and hindering the process of becoming an independent state. Denise, taking from everything you've said, we seem to be fighting in two fronts. We're fighting the unionist establishment, and we're fighting the semi-unionist establishment within the SNP. How can change be achieved at the top? Does the Yes movement have to have massive marches to outside Hollywood demanding change, demanding a referendum?
I actually, like, not to be like completely depressive, I can't imagine anything that will affect change at the top of the SNP. The SNP have no internal party democracy anymore. Their MPs and MSPs are frightened. They're scared. They're scared of the leadership, of what the leadership can do to them. Now, I was telling you about how scared women are, like absolutely terrified.
Yes.
The MPs and MSPs are equally absolutely terrified. You see what they can do in the press. There's nobody safe. They can take any words that's been said by any of the MPs and MSPs and twist them, and and that's the end of their career, and they're branded some name, and they've done it before. They've done it to people, but they've also protected people. So you see, like, Patrick Brady gets protected, Bob Stewart got protected, whereas like Neil Hamley didn't get protected. So they're very arbitrary. But Marion, the woman with the COVID.
The MP who travelled to up and down, when she was.
Yeah, she didn't get protected. I've forgotten her name.
Well, that was another one who went under the bus, so to speak.
Yeah, well and truly reversed over, so it depends. So they all know, unless they keep favour with the leadership, and then you have to remember things like vetting. So MPs have secrets, maybe things in their past or their family that they wouldn't want revealed. They might not be anything much, just a little bit embarrassing. So again, they don't want that ending up in the press. So I feel like the MPs and MSPs see what the SNP or Nicola Sturgeon basically does to anybody that opposes her, and how easy it is for them to manipulate the mainstream. They clearly have look what they did to Alex Salmond, a man, as I said, completely innocent, not a single stain on his character, yet he's been vilified, and the majority, in the press, 100% vilified. So they can do that to Alex Salmond. They can do that to anybody. They actually tried it with Joanna Chen, remember? About bullying?
The bullying? Yeah.
But luckily, her being a lawyer, closed that one down pretty quick. So I think they have a fear that, they can be they can be vilified in the press and their careers ruined, but not just their careers, their reputations, I think. And they're frightened. So I can't see them moving against Nicola Sturgeon. No. So only way I can see success is through Alba. That's the only way I can see. And I know, I don't pretend that is going to be easy, because it's really going to be hard, but it is the only hope. As you say, Alba's fighting against the Independence Party, against the Independence party of the SNP, and also fighting against unionists. And the British state is going to absolutely hate Alba, and they would far, far rather have Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP in power. So it's actually frightening even to talk about it, if you think of the scale of the task ahead of Alba, to build from nothing, to take over the mantle of the Independence Party from the SNP and deliver Scottish independence.
Well, ideally, they would be working together, ideally. Denise, are we looking towards general election 2024? and Holyrood 2026.
Yeah, I think like the thing is we have the council elections next year. So I think the council elections is a chance of getting out of the Twitter bubble, the social media bubble, because it's local. So hopefully have local campaigning, so then people will know about Alba and therefore get a reasonable vote and a reasonable number of councillors, which is vital for credibility to be taken seriously.
Yes.
But I'm not an Alba person, spokesperson or anything. So what I'm going to say is completely my opinion, but not Alba's. And probably a lot of people wouldn't agree with me in Alba. I don't know. But if I was Alba in charge, I would make the next general election a plebiscite. I'd always make it a plebiscite. I don't see why not. Every election can be a plebiscite on independence, because I think the Alba constitution is something like get independence at the earliest possible opportunity.
Absolutely.
So the next earliest possible next opportunity is at the Westminster election. And if Alba say, vote for us, and if we get elected, the majority will declare independence. That would be interesting.
But that would mean Alba candidates standing against the SNP candidates.
I would hope so. Yes. I mean, obviously, like you'll get the criticisms of splitting the vote, but the only way for one party to take over the mantle of another party is to stand against them. You have to stand against them. So that's what will happen. And, we have to prepare for it if that's what we want to do. We want to envisage a situation where the SNP collapses the way the Scottish Labour Party collapsed. So it's not without precedent. I mean, it happened when the Scottish Labour Party was replaced by the SNP. They had 41, they went to 6, no, they went to 1, and the SNP went to 56. So there's no reason these 48 SNP MPs can't be replaced by 48 Alba ones if we follow the 2015 scenario. So it's been done before. We can do it again. And for very much the same reasons. I mean, Labour was judged to have betrayed Scotland. And if the SNP are judged to have betrayed the independence movement, then there's no reason that they should get our votes in the 24 or wherever it happens, general election. But it's a massive hill to climb for Alba, a massive hill. And as I said, I do not speak for Alba. So everything I've said, they may not agree with, and they may have a gradualist approach.
That's not the impression I get from what they say. Denise, do you think we should see more campaigning, or will we see more campaigning at Holyrood, similar also to the one that you were part of?
Yeah, well, the women are going to campaign for sure. Now we have I feel still scared, I'm actually even scared to do this interview with you. I'm actually frightened because of, possible consequences. Felt a little bit happier when Joanna Cherry took on the case, because I thought, oh, we've got Joanna Cherry on our side. But it's still a very frightening time. But we are going to still campaign, and we've got a shopping trip, as it's called, to Glasgow on the 20th, and it's a shopping trip, as it's called. So there will be more. We need to raise so we've got two things. I mean, for me, as I've got the women's rights side and the independence side, and they go hand in hand, because as I was saying, we don't want women to be in a situation that they have to depend on Tories to protect our rights the way we are today. And we don't want women to have to be invoking the Equalities Act, which is a reserved power to protect our rights in Scotland, which we are doing with that case that For Women's brought on the gender recognition case. So they go hand in hand to an extent. We need and freedom of expression. So one of the things that Alba said, which is completely agree with, is the constitution for Scotland, that on day one, we have to have a constitution. If anything this government's taught me is do not trust your government. So we need a constitution that enshrines all our rights, the human rights in our constitution, and with a Supreme Court that will uphold our rights. So we need that on day one of independence.
There are people working on the constitutional issues. Now, I'm not convinced the SNP is taking any contact with them There's
No,
Dr.
the
Elliot
SNP will
Bulmar.
do
There's
nothing.
Mark McNaught. There are
Yes,
others very actively working on this. But
yes.
the SNP just seems to have put a wall up between people who actually know something about constitutions and their own ideas.
Yeah, well, the SNP are not interested in anything about an independent Scotland. That's why they're not interested in it. If it was a British constitution, they might be interested, but they're not intending to get independence. So why would they care about a constitution for an independent Scotland? The same as they haven't done any policy work at all, for 7 years. They haven't updated the economic case since the Growth Commission, which Nicola Sturgeon says is out of date. So why they're not doing any work? Because they've no intentions of getting independence, so they don't need to. If an independence referendum was called by Boris Johnson for May next year, they have no policies to go into that. They have no policies for it, they have no money for it, and they are doing no work on it. So forget the SNP, they're not bringing us independence. So so the campaign for women's rights and more general rights alongside the campaign for independence. So I think both things. And interestingly, when we were at the Scottish Parliament doing the handmaidens lobby of the Scottish Parliament, Now Scotland were also there, and Kenny McCaskill was doing the speech. So that's a sort of symbol of how we need to go forward. The rights of the Scottish people are the right of self-determination as part of our rights, women's rights, the rights to free expression. So it is about our right to be an independent country, and that's what we have to do. We have to start our campaign.
That was a great event. There were some fabulous speeches at the Now Scotland event. Short, brief, to the point, very punchy, and that followed, as you say, your own there. Now, how are people going to? You've been talking about how the SNP is not interested in independence. Now, a lot of people will not believe you, Denise. A lot of people will not see the evidence you've quoted, and there is ample evidence to suggest that the SNP have done no preparation and are not remotely interested under the current leadership. However, people who vote SNP are buying into an image, a TV image, an immediate image of Nicola Sturgeon. What will it take for people to wake up?
I think eventually it's going to be inaction. So, for example, my entire family, not my children, but my mother and father and sister, they loved Nicola Sturgeon. Like, they believed in her.
Well, we all did. We all did. We all thought she was the bee's knees, literally.
Yeah. So, but since the election, they've realized and they've stopped talking about independence, which is a bad thing. But people who need to go through the stages of grief. So actually, a lot of people are in denial, their anger. Then there's bargaining, which is like the secret plan. So denial is like, of course she wants independence. Anger is like secret you're plan. A Yoon or a 55th Brigade, shouting at people like Barhead Boy. That's the anger. And then there's the bargaining, which is like, oh, she has a secret plan, or just know that in November we'll get good people elected, like trying to figure it out. And then there's depression. A lot of people are in the depression bit at the moment. And then there's acceptance. And once there's acceptance, enough people in the independence movement have accepted that the SNP are not the vehicle to independence, then we're going to be able to rebuild. The trouble is, it is a rebuild, and it is going to take time. And so that is the sad thing. And people's dreams have been crushed. People who believed, who were excited. We saw a video today of Nicola addressing I think it was the 2019 conference, but it's similar to what she said in 2017. People have been told, people have given their money. I actually got my money back, £100. I gave them £100 when they announced this, the ScotRev fund. So people are excited. And so she's, and these people have been disappointed. So they need they have to give up on their dream. Some of them have to give up on their dream of ever seeing independence.
Yes, that's the tragedy.
And many people have died without seeing it. So asking people to give up their dream, there's this grieving process they have to go through. Yeah. And once enough people are through the grieving process, then, we'll be able to bill for independence. But the thing to hold on to, I think, is the fact that the Scots people themselves want independence.
Yeah.
We have enough votes. We have enough MPs and MSPs to declare independence. We've had opinion polls of 58% or 55%, and that's without a leader. That is without a leader motivating us. That's with a leader that is damping down the desire for independence. It's a leader that's telling us now is not the time. We need the broad shoulders of the UK, and we're still achieving, majority support for independence. So the majority support for independence is there in the country, but we don't have a party, a political vehicle. We don't have a political wing of the independence movement at the moment. Once the independence movement gets a competent political wing, then we will get independence. Once we have a political wing that's going to take the fight for independence to the international community, then we will get independence, because we've got enough people in Scotland that want independence. So it is a matter of the sooner we can accept the SNP are not interested, going to bring us independence, going to advance independence at all. In fact, it's the opposite. The SNP damp down the desire for independence. They put a cap on the desire for independence. They do everything to thwart ideas that could bring independence. Then, once we're there, we can then get independence.
So you see it basically, people are going to have to go through a process of acceptance that the SNP, as a vehicle to independence, is stuck on the road and perhaps broken down permanently.
Yeah. In fact, even worse is perhaps the reason we don't have our independence is because of the SNP.
It's reversing it's reversing in the wrong direction.
It's reversing over people, crushing people as it reverses.
Well, it's controversial, Denise. A lot of people will perhaps criticize you for that, but to be honest, the evidence is rather overwhelming, and it has been so since 2017, that this particular leadership is going nowhere near independence in other than words and empty promises. It's sad, but okay, Denise, I'm going to let you go. I know you're a busy woman. I really thank you for taking the time and once again sticking your head above the parapet. Thanks very much, Denise. All the best now.
Thanks for having me on your show.